Welcome once again to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City, and there's just something about this guy that's sitting directly across from me today, the one and only Pro Football Hall of Famer, Jan Stenerud, the great Kansas City Chief, and the first pure kicker ever inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. How you doing, my friend?
Fine. I just wonder what the pure means, but that's what they call me.
Yeah, pure kick.
Well, I know what it means. You couldn't do anything else but kick.
But kick, yeah, which is, I think that is fantastic because now you see there are more and more going in, and I think the first soccer-style kicker was Pete Gogolak, right?
That's exactly right.
He was the first, and then you were number two. And
Actually,
Garo Yepremian?
No, number two was actually Charlie Gogolak. He was Pete's younger brother. And the reason I remember all this so well, because in '64, that was my junior year at Montana State.
Uh-huh.
So I get asked this quite often, so I can remember some of this. I was from the stadium steps, of course. I was on the ski team. And part of my workout, particularly for the cross-country running, and I helped my ski jumping too, that was my main sport, I ran the stadium steps all the time. My freshman year, my sophomore year, so my junior year, and I played soccer, of course, in Norway. You play soccer in every country in the world, in those days anyway, quite a bit. And I played on teams since I was 7, 8 years old. I was 19 until I went to Montana. But so the kicker on the team was down there kicking the football with a toe, like people kick.
Square toe.
Yeah, and I had some running shoes, tennis shoes on, whatever you called it. Tried a few with the toe, so I asked him, can you kick with the side of your foot? So I had used the term, I think, like you take a corner kick in soccer. I'm sure he didn't know what a corner kick in soccer was. But nevertheless, he said, there's a guy for the Buffalo Bills. This is 1964. Pete Gogolak is the first one to kick with the side of his foot. So I tried a few.
And you didn't know that before then?
No, hell no.
Okay.
Basketball, I enjoyed going. Football, to me, was all that not exciting because I didn't understand the game. You played for 4 seconds. Then you stand around for 30 seconds, right? And then at Montana State, I ran the ball most of the times. It looked like we're doing exactly the same again after 30 seconds. So but it was fun to go to the games because the students went to the game. It was kind of a party. It was fun.
Sure.
Cheerleaders were coming out, doing the cartwheels.
I understand. I went to college too. I know what you're
of course they had nice skirts on, sweaters.
You bet.
It wasn't quite like they dress today, but it was just a fun atmosphere. So the football I didn't really care that much about because I didn't understand the game. So I kicked a few. So after I hit a few with the side of my foot, he told me he could because Pete Gogolak, I read about him. And Pete, look, he just had started. That was his first year in 1964 with Buffalo Bills. So I did that a few times. And Roger Kraft, who was the head coach at Montana State. I don't know if you remember the name Les Kraft.
I know Les Kraft. Yeah,
well, his dad had also played basketball at K-State. And from what I've been told, Roger Kraft in the early 50s was the first one to score a basket in Allen Fieldhouse.
Oh, wow.
And I'm pretty sure that is true. He's now actually at John Knox Village in Lee Summit. He lived in Bozeman, Montana for many years, but he had a daughter at Lee Summit that had been back here, and he had a fall, but he's fine now. He's 90 years old.
Wow.
But Roger Kraft walked across the field a few times on the way from his office to the field house.
Right. This is the basketball coach now, not the football coach.
So he sees me, and he bends down, he's 6'9" or whatever, to hold the ball a couple of times, and so he runs over to the football coach, Jim Sweeney.
Yeah.
And it says, there's a Norwegian skier out there kicking the football.
I'll bet Jim Sweeney went. And Jim Sweeney eventually became Washington State's head coach and Fresno State head coach, and he was an NFL assistant coach. Yeah,
both for the Raiders and I have some stories about when I was in the Raiders. he didn't like Al Davis too much. So anyway, so Roger trying to convince Sweeney to take a look at me, and he thought, basketball coach, what does he know about football?
Right.
So I didn't know this was going on at all. In the meantime, I kept running some and messing around, kicking some. But anyway, you did ask me a question, and I got into all this. But one day, on a Friday, before the last home game, my junior year, 1964, I ran the stadium step, paid no attention to the people that were practicing on the stadium field at that. And all of a sudden, I heard the coach's, Jim Sweeney's voice yelling to me. He didn't know my name. He called me skier. No, it's fine. Get your butt down on the field. He may not even use the word butt, if I remember right.
I don't think he did at that point.
And they had me kick off a few times, and I had never put a ball to the tee before. And I thought, this big football player was standing around. He's this skinny scared you're going to kick a football in front of them. Topped it a little bit. I was kicking with the wind, I remember. Not maybe 5, 6, 7 mile an hour wind. 40-yard line, 70 yards to the goalpost. So topped it like a squib kick, and Sweeney said, well, try one more. I didn't even know how many steps to take.
Mm-hmm.
Next one went through the goalpost into the seats. And they got quiet, and I did that 3 or 4 more times. And every kickoff ended up into the seats, and it was about 75 yards to the seats. Now, the altitude in Bozeman is almost as high as Denver, not quite. It's about 47, 4,800. So the ball probably goes about 5 yards longer there than it would in sea level or Kansas City for that matter. But that was the beginning. And he said, what are you doing tomorrow? And I knew what he was talking about, but I also knew enough that I couldn't be on the team. But he wanted me to suit up in front of used to the crowd, the full crowd.
And get used to the players get used to you too a little bit too, right?
Where the pads would go.
Yeah.
And I wasn't eligible. And then the crowd. And I told him, well, I'm not so worried about the crowd. I just ski jumped in Oslo, Norway 3 years ago. There was 80,000 people watching. So the crowd. Anyway, that's how we got on the way. But that's why I know that Pete was the first, and his younger brother Charlie went to Princeton.
Yes, he did. That's right.
Now, see, their parents were refugees from Hungary, and they were school teachers, I think, or maybe professors, maybe for all. And both Charlie and Peter went to Ivy League school, Cornell and Princeton.
Wow. Yes.
And then Yeprimin came in the next year, and I was the fourth one.
Oh, you were the fourth one.
But
okay.
I never got to see them. I didn't know what kind of steps they took because there was no ESPN, as you know, in 1964. They came about 15 years later or more. Yeah, 15.
Sure.
And then no NFL station, obviously.
Right.
So I tried to figure out the steps on my own.
So you had to do all that on your own. You had to figure that all on your own. And how did you, like, what?
Well, it was just a matter of, they said, you have about 1.3 seconds from the ball is snapped to hit the football. So, a couple of steps. I saw the toe kicker that took, 1, 2. So I did something like that, but from the side, so I could swing, my body around into the ball more.
Right.
And so then, so I was the first one to kick in 3 years later. I'm in the Super Bowl.
Yes.
And I was the first one with soccer style to kick. So from what I've been told, I read it later, that here they see a kid from Norway in the Super Bowl. Why don't my son go out and play soccer or learn to start kicking or whatever?
Exactly, yeah.
And so it starts quite a bit. I started more and more like that.
Yeah, and now that's all they are.
Well, I've been asked many times, though. You got to remember, when I came to camp, I kicked 60-yard field goal pretty routinely in camp. And I was the first one that thought we were going to kick a 60-yard field goal in the game. But the first one was Tom Dempsey, who kicked for the toe,
with the square toe, yeah.
And there was another guy that kicked a 60-yard field goal, too, with the toe. So still, if you had 10 kids that started from scratch and 5 kicking with the toe and 5 this side of the foot, I'm not so convinced what's the best approach.
Oh, still you're not?
No, but since everybody started practicing this way, that became, so I could kick just about far with my toe.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think, some of those straight-on kickers, as we'll call them, that would have to kick with their toe, they're just not, the colleges don't even recruit them anymore at high school. And high schools probably don't even have them. So there may not be any kind of a pipeline for those guys, right?
But I don't think they even try that way anymore.
Right.
But some of the kickers, the toe were pretty good. But I remember even Hank, after my rookie year, you may know this, Frank, but after my rookie year, I kicked a long. My first attempt in the pros was 54 yards, and I made it. And Lenny, well, of course, the quarterback was the holder in those
Len
days.
Dawson, yeah.
And we hardly practiced because the center would typically snap it. E.J. Holub and John Gillum and these guys before Bobby started snapping. They were busy playing, and the quarterback was busy practicing. And we had one short practice every day. So Friday afternoon, they kicked for a few minutes. That was it. But
yeah, that was the special teams practice was Fridays, right?
Yeah, but they were just not very much.
No, that's what I meant. Now they probably practice special teams virtually every day at practice at some time.
We only had 5 coaches, including Hank.
Wow.
John Beek was the number 6 coach. He was hired in '68. So it wasn't much practice that way. But in that particular kick, I remember Lenny he had good hands. You could catch the ball in the snap. In those days, the strings weren't always where they should be. And maybe even location wasn't always where they should be. But he could turn that thing around, not after put it on the ground, but it caught it hit. If he felt the string, he could just do it in that and put it on the ground.
And then put it on the
But
ground.
that particular time, it was stuck in between, so the strings were straight against me, I remember. But I'm young and charged up, and a low line drive that clears pretty easily. So I ended up with the longest field goal, and most field goal I had 6 blocked, I think. We kicked from 6 yards, and the fields weren't the best either, or 7 yards deep. So I had to go to basic training. I wasn't even a citizen yet, but I was still eligible for the U.S. Army.
You're National Guard, right?
So I got into a unit in Bozeman, Montana, and transferred to Kansas City. And somehow, I don't know how they did this, but I was able to postpone the basic training for 6 months until right after my rookie year. So right after the season was over, I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana. There for 5.5 months, of course, there's no cell phones, obviously,
Right.
in 1968. No television, no newspaper. You're not allowed to because you're preparing. Most of those guys ended up going to Vietnam. Some of the units were called up to go to Vietnam.
Sure.
It was a constant fear of that. So the first newspaper I see is the day I got out of basic training. And I get the newspaper at the airport. It's Shreveport, Louisiana. I see the front page. I get to the sports page, and there's a picture of Hank Stram and Jim Schaaf. They are in Europe recruiting professional soccer players and rugby players. And they brought back Bobby Howfield. You may remember his name.
I remember that name.
Horst Muhlman.
Yep.
And they also had the other two I can't remember. Was one rugby player. His name was John Haslam. John Haslam. He was 6'11". And I thought, oh boy! So I saw this in the paper. I saw that. That's the first thing I saw. Then I get to Kansas City right before camp starts, and the rookies go to camp. Heard SC report from camp that these guys are really good or whatever. But I get to camp, but I do beat them out. I was a little bit better, but Horst stayed on, and they also played soccer for the Spurs. Mm-hmm. And Bobby was actually he was the last cut. And we played Denver, I think, in the opening game, and the Denver kicker had a rough time. And Bobby was going to fly back to England on that Monday.
Right.
And some of the other guy says, Lou Saban was the coach. I think, so we're going to take you over to the locker room with Denver, the visiting room in the old stadium. And Bobby Halfie flew back with the team to Denver in 1968 and was there for several years.
Yes.
And then he was traded to New York for Jim Turner.
Gosh, that's amazing.
So he was on.
Yeah.
And one quick story about Haslam. So I'm through talking for a while here.
No, you're just getting started.
Hey, listen, I'm at Montana State about 10 years ago up there. I go up there quite a bit.
Yeah, you spend your summers up there.
I met an assistant basketball coach at Montana State. Mm-hmm. Tall, big guy, an English accent. He introduced himself as Chris Haslam. And I said, Haslam? England? And before I say the more, said, yeah, my dad was in training camp, competed against you in 1968.
Oh, gosh. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and he's now an assistant coach at Utah State.
Yeah. And before we go back, I'm going to take you back to we're going to go back to Fetson, okay, in a minute here. But tell everybody how you actually, we just had the draft here in Kansas City, right? I mean, it was just huge. I mean,
sure was.
Everything you see, right?
Come a long way.
Okay, right. How did you hear that you were drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs when you got drafted out of Montana State?
So I kicked my senior year, right? But fortunately, the last game was against the University of Montana, the feared Grizzlies. I mean, the Grizzly Bobcat game, that's a big deal in Montana. It's very serious.
It still is.
Yeah. So I kicked a 59-yard field goal in that game. And about a week later, the Bozeman on Fridays, that's 6 days later, he said, Bobcat, a nickname for Montana State, Bobcat kicker sets national record. Well, that kick broke the pro record by 3 yards and the college record by 5. It took him 6 days to find out. So then somebody was saying, maybe you could stay in school on a full court. I didn't pay much attention to it. About a week or two later, I get a telegram with the athletic director, Gene Burdett at Montana State, says, I have a telegram from the Chiefs here in my office. Been lying around my office for a couple of days. You better go and pick it up. So I went in there, and I opened with the athletic director. It says, congratulations on being drafted in the third round of the AFL redshirt draft. Signed, Jack Stedman.
That was it.
Maybe one more sentence. See you in.
Yeah,
Looking
sure.
forward to see you
Congratulations.
in red and white or red
Right.
and gold, whatever, next year. So the AD says, you better go into the football coach, Jim Sweeney. He will explain the future draft choice or the AFL, NFL, and all that
Right.
stuff.
They actually had your rights for the AFL within once they drafted you, right?
Yeah, but
you could opt out to go to the NFL.
Well, no, what happened? I was a senior, so I was done in school. That's why
Right.
I go into the football coach, and I said, Coach, I'm going to ski this winter, and then the spring quarter, I'm going back to Norway. And he said, Nah, let me explain to you what the opportunity you might have. I want you to stay on the team one more year. I checked this out. You're changing sports from skiing to football, so you're eligible to be another sport
Right.
here. So he explained about the AFL, NFL, football, and you could make money on doing this stuff. I was surprised, actually, with my senior year, that I changed my ski scholarship to football, the more football scholarship. That was my first senior year then. So he said, no, I give you a scholarship next year, and I think you can make it professionally. So I stayed in school, and that's what happened. I had a pretty good year, and now the NFL had a special draft. Over about 30 of us that had been drafted as future draft choices by the AFL.
Right.
And I was the first one to be picked by that in that draft.
In the
of
red
30
shirt
people.
draft, yeah.
But the team that picked me was the worst team in the league. It was brand new. It played 1 year with the Atlanta Falcons.
Atlanta Falcons.
So now the choice was, do I go to Atlanta Falcons, maybe one of the worst teams, or go to maybe the best team
Right.
in the AFL? And it just so happens, too, that, Bobby Beathard was a scout there 1 year.
Right.
He flew me down to the Orange Bowl to watch the Chiefs play the last regular season game in '66. The next week, they would go to Buffalo to play the championship game, and after that, they would go to the Super Bowl I. So I met Lamar and Hank and all these people. And once I met Lamar and Hank and Tommy O'Boyle, they were the head talent scout. Now they call him general manager, I guess.
Right.
And Bobby Beathard, I knew darn well where I wanted to go.
Yeah, because of the leadership situation
The
with
people
that
that I
team.
met.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
But I got out of Kansas City. I flew back with the team to Kansas City. And Hank offered me a 5-year. They called it no cut. I have no idea if it was, but there were no attorneys involved. There were no agents.
Isn't that funny? No agents. No. It was you.
So if I hadn't panned out, I don't know how much that no cut would have been. Don't know that. It probably was fine.
Sure.
If Hank or Lamar told me. Lamar didn't tell me. I'm sure it was fine. But I ended up signing in Kansas City. But I did not sign right then. I said, I got to go to Atlanta. Flew to Atlanta next weekend. They offered me a certain amount, and I said no. How much in Kansas City? They didn't know. They didn't have a copy of the other. It wasn't until years later that the players' union had a copy of what the players made.
Yes, right.
So the people that when I got into the league, the people that made pretty good money, they told you a lower amount. And the people that were making little money, they were almost embarrassed what they were making, so they exaggerated.
Yeah.
So we never really knew what the other guy was making.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
But anyway, I decided.
And then the rest for you is history, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But when you think about your background, okay, you're from Norway, okay, Fetsen, Norway, not too far outside of Oslo, right? About 30 kilometers,
You're actually
whatever it is, right in there
about
somewhere.
17 miles, 30
Right,
kilometers.
and you're about 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours from Stockholm, Sweden.
Wow.
So that's basically where you were, right? You were up, you were in Scandinavia, and as you talked about, growing up, your grandfather was an Olympian.
No.
He wasn't. Oh, I'm sorry. He was
that's
an
it.
alternate Olympian.
People, if when you talk about people, it's easy to get a little bit better every time a story
sure,
gets
absolutely,
retold.
yeah.
So I don't know anything. I had an uncle that had been an alternate for the Olympics in
it was your uncle.
1928.
Okay.
And my dad was a good ski jumper, the whole family, but everybody when I grew up ski jumped. I mean, we had in my little town, we had probably 15, 20 ski jumps, and 2 of them we could light up at night. Just turn the switch on, and we like the light in the stadium.
Right.
And we were ski jumpers, so everybody ski jumped.
And everybody probably cross-country skied, speed skated. They did all the winter sports, right?
Yes.
And then during the springs, the short springs and summers you had, and falls, you played soccer, right?
We played,
Yeah. So
every open grass field, we played soccer.
Right.
But we had teams since we were 8 years old. And the ski club, we were 8 years old, we could start competing, going to meets.
So what was it like growing up in Norway?
Well, of course I enjoyed it. Scandinavia is a wonderful place. A little bit rough time. I didn't realize it at the time, but after the war, it was a little bit tougher because the war again ended. Germany invaded Norway in 41, I think 40 or 41.
Right, early on.
And the war lasted just a few weeks, and there was no chance. So they gave in, and of course.
You had to. You're overwhelmed by Germany's numbers.
So there weren't that many people. Well, there were several people that lost relatives in the war. But and interesting enough, they had a Communist Party, and Quisling was head of the Communist Party. It's a small percentage, but the German made him the prime minister. So it was rough times during the war.
And you were born in 42.
42. So
you were born right during...
I don't remember any of it, but I've been told all this stuff afterwards, of course. And right after the war, I can remember some about just when the war was over. I think I remember, not sure if I've been told the story enough. But it seems to me like I remember watching out the kitchen window, and a German soldier came and talked to my dad. He was doing something in the front yard. Then he came in and told my mother that the war is over. We knew that, but I hope we can be friends from now on or whatever.
Oh, wow.
And I'm only 2.5 years old, so I'm not sure if that's my memory, what
something
I've been told,
stamped on your brain.
or if I've been told that story so many times that I think I saw it.
Sure. Well, that's okay.
Sure.
You know?
But that was about, that was then.
And what about Mom and Dad, Johan and Clara? What was...
Well, he was actually a carpenter, but after the war, he had to work construction. It was tough times. And Mother, of course, she was a housewife. The school teachers and the nurses were about the only time the women went to school for in those days. You know, it was very common that the mother took care of the house. And so I remember growing up, my dad there were three of us, my sister, the older sister, and myself, middle, and the younger brother. And my dad would always say, you guys got to do a good job in school because I want you to go to school and get educated so you can get an indoor job.
You're right.
In Norway,
I don't want you doing what I'm doing.
Right.
You're right.
Exactly right.
Right. And so you did, obviously. But what about your sister and your younger brother? What happened
Well,
to them?
It turned out also that my sister was not, she later was not too happy about this. But it turned out, but it was in my class was 17 in grade school.
Oh, gosh.
I was the only one that went to the next level of school.
To what we would call high school.
I was going to go to a 2-year school because I think it was required to go 9 years to school. And then now it's 12 now, I believe. This is, 60-some years ago.
Sure.
But the way it turned out, she actually went to become an au pair in England.
She's a nanny for all practical purposes.
And so she learned to speak English pretty well, of course. And she didn't really know what to do. So, well, what happened was I had an uncle and aunt that had immigrated to Buffalo in 1921.
Wow.
They actually, how they ended up in Buffalo, I'm not sure. But they worked for the Butler family. That was the family that owned the Buffalo Evening News.
Uh-huh.
And I think my aunt became a cook or take care of the house. And my uncle did all kinds of stuff around the house. It was a big, a rich family. And they would come back to Norway quite often. The first trip I remember back was in 1947. I'm almost 5 years old. And they would talk about America. And it was made an impression on me. The skyscrapers in New York, the fancy cars, and all the stuff that was so big and so, and of course we saw the movies, made in Hollywood.
Right.
So that stuck with me. And she'd come back maybe years later, same thing. And here all of a sudden, I get an offer to come because I had competed in ski jumping. And I did pretty well. I mean, I had the second longest jump in the Norwegian Junior National Championship in 1962. I finished in the top pretty high. So when I get then a letter from Montana State offering me a ski scholarship, I've all been fascinated with America, the greatest place on earth.
Right.
And of course I want to go.
Had you learned English by that time?
Well, in those days, we started in grade school, when I got time up to 5th grade, you could sign up for an English class 2 afternoons a week after school.
Right.
And I did that. And then when you get to high school, you had not only have to learn English, you have German, French, and English.
Oh,
that's
wow.
required.
So you spoke 4 languages.
That's required for only 3 years in one division. If you concentrate to be an engineer, for example, that's 3 years of high school, French, German, and English. if you want to be, if you take the English or the language part of it, then you have 5 years of English, German, and French. So I'd had some English. So I thought I was not too bad. But when I came to Montana State and sit in English class and take notes, and you miss something in almost every sentence that the teacher said.
Absolutely.
I studied pretty hard.
It was a challenge, yeah. But okay, so you're really great ski jumper in high school back in.
But they're all club sports.
No, but they're all club sports.
Yeah, we competed every weekend.
I know there were maybe 20 or 30 United States colleges at that time that had ski teams, right? Everybody else was playing football, basketball, baseball.
It's about
doing
30.
All the other
it's
things.
about 30 of them.
Right. So the deal was, how did they hear about you?
Well, I noticed over the years there were only almost 3 or 4 promising juniors that ended up having ski scholarships. But I didn't pay much attention to it. When I get the letter, it's from the ski coach at Montana State. Bob Beck was his name. And it was the skier from Norway was already one there. His name was Tor, T-O-R, Tor Fagerås. Well, I remember his name so well because he had won the Norwegian Junior National Championship 2 years in a row before he went.
So he was a hero back home, right?
He was very good, but he made the choice of going to school because he said his family in those days, things changed. Now in Norway, you don't pay for college at all. For many, many years, college has been free. But in those days, even high school cost a little bit, and college cost a lot of money in the early 60s, late 50s. Now it's changed totally. But so he knew that the best way for him, for his life, was to go get an education. And of course, he was fascinated with America too. Who isn't?
Sure.
And so I recognized his name because he had been a junior national champion 2 years. Nordic combined, you get points for ski jumping and points for cross-country skiing.
Right.
Then his younger brother won it the next 2 years and actually got a silver medal in the Olympics in 1964, was favored to win the gold. So I knew Tor's name. So we had this discussion at home. My father thought it was a great idea. My mother was a little bit concerned, what if I stayed? Or whatever.
Which you did.
But it wasn't a plan until I started kicking the football.
Right.
And I also was amazed, that you actually could get paid.
Yeah, to play eventually,
Yeah, how could you get paid to kick a football?
So ski jumper, you were really good at Montana. Was there any thought in your mind that maybe as good as I am, you're an All-American here, that you were going to be on the Olympic team here in the United States?
No, I didn't think I was good enough because you got the four in the country were in 1952, for example, the first 6 in the Olympics. 4 of the first 6 are Norwegians.
Right.
When I grew up, they won all the gold medals almost early on. No, I was good, but I wouldn't be the top 4 in the country.
Right.
Even if I stayed home for 2 or 3 more years, I could be pretty good, but I didn't think that was realistic.
And then your career, obviously, at Montana State was you refer. In fact, you're on Montana State's Mount Rushmore of athletes that have gone through Montana State, not just ski people, but just athletes. Period. Basketball players, football players, whatever. You're one of the greatest athletes ever at Montana State.
Well, I was the way it worked out for me. There weren't that many people who competed for the kicking job.
Right.
There weren't that many people that were skiers.
Right.
So I was fortunate in that way. So I didn't have to compete against the millions. Now, later in the pros, to keep your job, because in those days, you brought in 3 or 4 people every goddamn year.
To compete against
for 19 years. And they got to be pretty good. So I never felt, so then you had to compete against somebody that were pretty darn good every year. And almost, by that time everybody's almost even. It's not a big difference between even the 4th best kicker can be brought in several then because you didn't have camps, mini camps. Everybody reported to camp in July. They hadn't seen each other since the last game, maybe in December the year before. But you brought 115, 20 people to camp.
Yeah.
And we had 6 exhibition games, 8 years up at William Jewell College.
Gosh, yeah.
And some people that were cut every week,
Yeah.
And it was pretty tense. It was.
If football hadn't worked out, what do you think?
I would have go back to Norway, become an engineer.
Okay. Yeah, because I know, and we'll talk about your business
that's what
acumen here as well.
I'd be started on my brother and sister, but you asked about them later. So when my uncle and aunt in Buffalo, my uncle passed away unexpectedly about 1960. My sister just come back from England, been up here. And my uncle and aunt didn't have any kids. So the family decided my sister speaks English, she'd go to Buffalo, help my aunt out. So she also got a job at Buffalo Evening News. And Larry Phelps, I don't know if you remember that name at all, but anyway. So then, while she's there, she is applied for a job at United Nations to become a guide in the United Nations.
Oh, wow.
And she gets the job.
Oh.
You know?
Well, she was multilingual.
Yeah, and
so
she's and a pretty girl. She was nice, and so she got that job. So it turned out that way.
Yes.
Right. Then later, she actually stays in New York and become a SAS, Scandinavian Airline System. As an airline, she worked for the ticketing and did some more stuff for SAS. And then she meets an Englishman, and she married him, and they lived in England, and then splits the time between England and Naples, Florida.
Right.
Now, my younger brother, he stays at home, and he becomes an engineer, a civil engineer. And I think he was pretty good at it. And his last project was to, I almost get emotional talking about it, was to widen the road between Lillestrøm, where the high school was, and Fetsund, my little hometown. So he was in charge of that road widening to 4 lanes. And at this time, he's 70 years old. They get it done. That takes 3 or 4 years. He cuts the ribbon and walks home 200 yards to his house. Retires. That's it.
Oh, gosh. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is really, that's something. Your family was amazing. That goes back to your mom and dad. Work ethic and everything you kids went through when you were younger, and everything they went through in the war and the whole thing. So
well, it worked out that way. We didn't have any plans. I think my brother had a plan to become an engineer, but I sure as hell didn't have a plan to do what I ended up doing. But that's the way that was the background.
Yeah, right. And it's an amazing story. To me, it's one of the most fascinating stories about someone who ends up in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, okay, as you did, to begin your life where you began it, and all of a sudden you achieved all these things, and these step by step things happened to you in your life that afforded you the opportunity to do that. I mean, do you ever look back on that and just go, wow, that is pretty unusual?
Because you get, now, Frank, it's a long time I had an interview quite like this, but no, you get people call you from time to time and talk, and somebody want to write a book, but I'm not really interested in that, I don't think. First of all, a book is 39 years since I was in football, and to buy a book now with the internet, if you want some kind of somebody can read about you a little bit afterward, they can find a few things on the telephone or on the internet. Or whatever. Right,
and people don't read a lot anymore either. That's not a good thing.
So the book
but
thing
is
just to be, why would I do that if I could sell 100,000 copies and make a lot of money on it?
New York Times bestseller list, of course I'll do it.
But I don't think that's going to happen after all these years.
Yeah,
I might sell a few thousand, but then the other reason would be an ego thing, because you've written a book about your life. But I don't think that's something that will convince me to do that.
So your career, you played in 2 Super Bowls, obviously.
No,
won one.
I was not in the I actually signed with the Chiefs 3 weeks.
That's right. 3 weeks before they played.
I signed 3 weeks before Super Bowl.
Super Bowl 1. Okay, so you play in Super Bowl 4, and you win that game 3 field goals, I believe, right?
Take 3 field goals early in the game, the first half anyway.
Yeah. Other things you remember from that?
Yeah, I remember quite a bit. To get there, we had of course, by that I came to Kansas City '67. The Chiefs had played in Super Bowl 1, so the town was on fire then too. Chiefs it was really fun. Right time. Stadiums were packed. The old stadium, of course, we played in the old stadium during the exhibition season. They only seated 35,000 because they put the stands in the Wolfpack when the baseball season was only got up to about 50,000, but it was completely packed. And people loved the Chiefs, and it was fun. And so in '69, Lenny gets hurt. Hank is looking, the first 5 doctors says, you got to have surgery. Hank finally finds the doctor that says, you don't need surgery.
Believe me, if you knew Hank Stram, you understand exactly what we're talking about here. Len, you're not hurt. You just have a little pain. You're really not hurt.
He finally found someone said he may be able to 5 or 6 people back playing, right? And, of course, Jackie Lee had come in. We had traded Pete Beathard was our backup quarterback. First-round draft choice out of USC in '64. Traded him in '67 to the Houston Oilers for Ernie Ladd, biggest human being I'd ever seen by far, 6'10", with an afro haircut.
Yeah.
310, and he was built like a defensive back. He was a professional wrestler, remember? He was built like this, thin in the waistline, 310 pounds, being built that way.
He was an amazing athlete.
Yeah. And then, of course, we had, so Lenny gets hurt, and we playing, and Mike Livingston, after Jackie Lee plays 1 quarter, breaks his collarbone. Something like this.
Broke his shoulder.
And Mike Livingston comes in. Hadn't played. It was his second year in the league. And we won all 6 games. Yeah. Of course, we had a really good defense. And we did, and Gerald Wilson and I were, I think it's safe to say.
Who was the punter?
We were the best kicking duo in football then.
Yes.
So we won a lot of games. So then we have to navigate into the playoffs. We had to go to New York to play the Jets, who probably won the most significant Super Bowl ever.
Yeah, Joe Namath.
Super Bowl III, because Packers had dominated the first 2. Then Super Bowl III, Baltimore favored by 18 points, and the Jets win.
Yeah.
16-7. Now the next year, we Super Bowl, we underdog by 13, 14 points.
Yeah, there's Minnesota.
You know, because
Purple
of the
people
AFL,
eaters.
NFL. So now the first playoff game, we go back to Shea Stadium to play against the Jets that had won. And it was a brutal day, and the Mets had won the Miracle Mets had won baseball. The turf had been picked up or taken up by fans. There was nothing but dirt, a little bit of grass and sand. The wind was howling. And it was we won 13-6. 13-6. And then we had to go to Oakland. They had beaten us twice during the season. And we played and we beat them 17-7. So it was not an easy way to get there.
Yeah, that was a very satisfying game.
Then we go to the Super Bowl and we give up 7 points. So in 3 playoff game, 2 playoff game, championship game, Super Bowl, the defense gives up 20 points divided by 3. That's less than 7. 6.7 a game.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
And we win, that was it, 13-6, 17-7, 23-7.
Right.
But during that week, a lot of stuff going on because Lenny was, we fly down. It was only 1 week for one reason. One of the few Super Bowl, only 1 week between the championship game and the Super Bowl.
Right.
We got out to New Orleans just before the Superdome was built. We played Tulane Stadium, big, huge old stadium, 80,000 people there. And then we do the practice. Then I think it's on Wednesday, we have a team meeting. And we've been told that Lenny Dawson had been accused of being involved with a gambler called Donald Dawson.
Right.
Who had been, and that there could be some, problem for Lenny or whatever.
Exactly,
and
yeah.
Under all this pressure.
This is a big controversy that week, yeah.
But also, still, even then, it was probably had 600-700 riders by then. It wasn't like it is now. But still, by that time, it became the biggest sporting event in America.
Yeah.
After Super Bowl III, there's no question.
Every
about
major newspaper in the country is covering that Super Bowl.
Plus,
and a lot of the
plus even then, that
ones
said
as well.
70 million people watched it.
Right.
Now there's 120 or whatever. Right. But there were 240 million people in America. Now it's 350. So percentage-wise, it was almost as many Americans watching it then as you do now. So it was the biggest sporting event in the country. So Hank has a meeting, and he explains to us that on the NBC News that evening, the opening story with Huntley Brinkley report is that a quarterback is going to be accused of being involved with some gambling stories or whatever. And Lenny says, well, I hardly knew that. And E.J. Hollop stands up, say a few swear words, and Lenny's our man, whatever. You believe it?
You're allowed to curse on a podcast until I know you are a gentleman. So for you, that'd be a little
everybody
tough
chimes in or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So that's his behind it. But for Lenny, of course, it bothered. It was worrisome. He didn't sleep very much. He and Johnny Robinson were roommates, I remember. Then we get to the stadium, and there's tornado warnings. Is it the temperature in the 40s, I remember.
Yeah.
And the Vikings are favored, and we ended up, our defense is strong. We moved the ball. We ended up getting 3 field goals. And right before the half, it is 3rd and 5, I think. And I'm standing there thinking, if you only get 3 points, there's 2 touchdowns. These guys are good. The other team, they're favored. If we can get a touchdown now, it's 16-0. We're in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
That is 65 toss power trap. It's called, the play hasn't even been practiced in weeks, right?
Yeah. And all of a sudden, history, there it goes.
Yeah.
Wins. Watch this one break open, boys.
Yeah.
Boys, watch this one. He was on Hank Stram. Yeah, I think he was the first coach
It's
ever to
been
be
shown,
mic'd up,
and
right?
what I've been told about that, It was that Pete Sable's, Steve Sable's son, dad,
Ed Sable.
Ed Sable.
Ed Sable.
He had asked Bud Grant first. That's a story I've heard of. It been told anyway. But Bud wasn't the most talkative. He would have been a good one anyway.
No, huh?
But he didn't want to do it. But Hank.
Hank right away.
We've been told that Hank was asked second, because I guess they thought that Minnesota was going to win, I suppose.
Yeah.
And Hank, but that's what Hank looked like on the side. The only thing that I think that bothered maybe Lenny a little bit, it made it look like Hank is calling every play. Because in those days, Hank and the offensive coach came with the game plan, they had meetings with the quarterback, and they go through so the quarterback ends up calling 90% of the plays, which I'm sure that what happened in that game too. But, Hank was an offensive coach. He loved what he was doing. He was good at it. Yeah. And he also knew we had a hell of a defense. He knew that too, so they were pretty conservative.
Yeah, and I think they're the best coaches too. They're the ones that know. I know what, I'm not going to try to fit them into my style. I'm going to see what I have, and I will work around them to try to, mold them into a football team that can.
And the amazing thing about our defense, of course, Otis was so phenomenal. And I remember playing up in Green Bay 15 years later. James Lofton was a great, great receiver.
Right.
And one time somebody asked me, what about that James Lofton? Is he the best receiver you ever seen or play with? I said, yeah, he's really good, but I tell you what, we had a guy in Kansas City called Otis Taylor. I can't say that, and it was better than Otis. I see James at the Super Bowl this year. He still remembers that story. He said, he comes up to me and says, you think Otis was better than I was? But anyway, we win that game, but it wasn't easy. And then halftime, now they limit the halftime to some extent. At halftime, I think it lasted 37, 38 minutes. And now we're leading 16-0. We're big underdogs. Yeah. And the momentum just kind of stopped. I mean, it's hard. And we go out there again, and they score first. And then it's that little short pass to Otis, and then the defense takes over.
That was it. Yeah, that was phenomenal. What are the other, for you, and I also want to get into later. In fact, this is a funny story, but the first time I ever met you will probably not remember this.
Yes, I do. It was in Green Bay.
Was in Green Bay. Yeah. I might have done that interview, as a matter of fact, about James Lofton and Otis Taylor. At least I can enhance my story here, John.
Maybe that was you.
Maybe that was me to ask that question. Yeah. But the deal was that was the first time I met you and Lynn Dickey and Paul Kaufman. You were all there.
The Chiefs had cut me. I was 38 or 9 years old, and Marv Levy came in. And he did want to change my kicking style some. He'd been special teams coach. He was hang time was very important, in particular on punts, obviously.
Right.
So I said, Coach, if I kick the ball 5 yards deep in the end zone, and instead of you want me to kick to the 5-yard line, the 4-yard line, as the ball is high, it takes him a second to run that 10 yards. And on kickoffs, they're going to get a running start anyway. It's not like a punt,
Exactly.
And I want to kick it high. So the last couple of years, my kickoffs went to not in the end zone anymore. Mm-hmm. So they probably thought my leg was gone. And Nick Lowry comes in, and he is a good kicker. But I felt like I competed, well. I thought I was going to be able to keep the job. And I'm the only one left. I'm the oldest guy on the team. So I totally understand if Nick and I are neck and neck in training camp.
Sure.
It makes sense to get a guy that's 15 years younger.
Well, not just that. It's probably a monetary consideration as well,
maybe
right?
A little, yeah, that's not the millions we have today.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe 10,000, 20,000.
Yeah, but back in those days, that's a lot of money, right? Now that's pocket change.
So anyway, I'm sitting out the whole season. There was only one guy. Hank was able to talk to John McKay. He was the coach at Tampa.
Right.
But John McKay didn't even come out. There were 3 or 4 of us kicking there. It was the first week after I was cut. And it was... in my mind, there was no question that I kicked it further and more accurate than anybody else there.
Right.
But I wasn't signed. So I stayed out, and at 4, and I went out to the stadium, and I think Jim Shaw has seen me sometime. I go to the stadium, work, and I go in the field and practice kicking some. And so then I kind of forgot about it.
You thought it was over at that
so
point,
4
right?
games to go, I get a call from Bart Starr. And, of course, he's one of my heroes, at that time. And he had trouble with his kicker. And they said, can you still kick? And I said, yeah, I think so. I want you to come up.
Yeah, Bart Starr was the head coach now. He wasn't the quarterback anymore, right?
Of course, he won Super Bowl. He won 3 NFL championships in 64, 5, and 6. Before that, he was the MVP in Super Bowl 1 and 4.
Right.
Then he was out of football, but then they hired him as a coach. And he is the finest man
He's
ever,
a wonderful
ever.
man.
So I got, but I did so. I mean, I didn't kick the ball. So we played I'm there for the last 4 games. So on the way back from Detroit, he comes back, talk to me, and says, I want you to go back to camp. And I said, Coach, I went through that last year. I think I did well, but I didn't make the team. And if I just come as an insurance policy, I don't know if I can do that. And he says, I need to win. He says, if you're the best kicker in camp, yes, we're going to bring in 3 or 4 guys.
Right.
But if you're the best kicker in camp, you got my word. The job is yours. So I took my chances. I made the team. And then by that time, we start breaking in the punters as holders. So the next 3 or 4 years, I make well over 80% of my kicks up there. 1 year, over 90%, which was unheard of then. But there's a reason for that. You start getting more practice. And so I had good years up there, and I was very happy to do that. But then the last year, we were only 8-8. We gave up. And Len Dick is a great quarterback.
Yeah.
And we scored 40 points in many games. We had to score 40 to win.
But
and we only 8-8.
In the old Green Bay style, they were great on defense at one time, but they didn't have a defense.
We had so many injured people.
Yeah. Really.
So Bart was fired.
Yeah, he was fired.
And
He came to me. He came down. He was selling a book after he'd retired. He wasn't coaching anymore. He was fired, and he came through Kansas City. He was on a book tour. He was with Sherry, his wife. She's an absolutely wonderful woman as well. And he told me, he said, Frank, I'm going to be real honest with you. He said, I was in so far over my head. I had no idea what those coaches do and what they have to do on a day in, day out basis. I was not prepared.
No, but then by the time I went there, had been there for 4 or 5 years.
Yes, right.
So by that time, I think it was pretty darn good. But you're right, in the beginning.
Yeah, he said, I was really in over my head.
And we loved Bart, and he was so wonderful. I mean, it's so he gets fired. So then Forrest Gregg takes over, and he trades me to Minnesota.
Minnesota, I know, in the same conference.
And I've been the pro. Yeah, so then, but then I go. I'm going indoor, you know. So people thought he really upset and said, "No, Bart is fired." Most of my players were getting ever towards the end of the career up there too. So I got indoor and I make the Pro Bowl at 42 years old.
Well, I'm going to say kicking indoors isn't a bad deal,
no,
right?
It's a good deal. But then the next year was the first year in camp I did have any competition in camp.
Right.
And we had Bud Grant came back then. And it was strange. We had beaten, Bud Grant was the coach in the Super Bowl IV, you know. And we ended up standing next to each other and practice a lot because I didn't practice a lot. And he didn't. He was unbelievable. He hardly spoke. But when he spoke, I mean, he was dead quiet.
You listened.
Everybody, they had so much respect for him. And I can see why. It was incredible in so many ways. You know, he played for the Lakers.
Right.
He's probably the biggest athlete or sportsman or whatever in the history of the state of Minnesota.
That nobody knows about because he never talked very much.
Yeah, but those days he was so respected, and later too. It's remarkable.
So 19 years, 3 in the AFL, 16 in the NFL, retired in 1985. Did you have any inkling at that point that you were going to eventually end up in the Hall of Fame?
No, not at all. Well, there was some, let's listen to some reports or games that in my 18th or 19th year, some of the announcer was a future Hall of Famer or whatever. I thought, yeah, right. So then didn't think much of it.
Right.
Really didn't, because nobody's ever. So then in 91, that is 25 years after Super Bowl. It was a 25-year anniversary of the Super Bowl. So I get picked for the silver anniversary. They call it 25, right? Silver anniversary Super Bowl team. So I'm invited to go down to Tampa. We have a parade down in Tampa. Well, about the week before that, I do get a letter from Pete Elliott. He is the executive director of the Hall of Fame. And he says, you are one of the 15, you're one of the 15 finalists for the Hall of Fame. There were 15 then. There were no contributor category or whatever. And I saw the name on the list, and no kicker's ever been even thought of, I don't think.
Right. No pure kicker was.
But there was some talk, though, right, that kicking become important in winning games.
Oh,
so
very
there
important.
started to be some talk about, may I take a look at it? So I saw that list, and I thought, there's no way. So that's the last time I thought about it. And then we have a parade downtown for that silver anniversary Super Bowl team. Only a couple of people had cell phones. And we were supposed to let people know where we were in case you were elected. Well, how can we contact you at noon? Because the Hall of Fame voters, they meet in the morning before the Super Bowl.
I got a parade to do.
No, but they meet that morning.
Right.
They come in from all over the country. Now they changed a little bit because now they know by the time the honor show is on Thursday night.
Right.
But for years, it was announced at noon on Saturday because they met that morning, got over all that stuff. And so I borrow somebody's phone, and I see most of these guys that are finalists are in this parade too. Anyway, so I call back to my hotel. My son is with me, and the line is busy, and they go 5 or 6 calls waiting. So I said, well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So operator said, do you want me to break in? I said, yeah. So my son answers the phone, and he said, I'm talking to USA Today. Dad, you're in the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Excuse me.
So,
And that's really how I found out about it. So
well, with your son, too.
Yeah.
I mean, that just must have been just incredible. Yeah.
But then I remember, so I went back to the parade, but I didn't want to tell anybody because there were several guys because he knew the list of the name. I went in with Tex Schramm, John Hanna, Stan Jones, who was the old timer. He had played offensive defensive line for Chicago and the
John Hanna was a great
Redskins.
offensive lineman too.
Yep, yeah. And by the way, so was Ed Buddy.
Yeah, Ed Buddy, you bet.
And Earl Campbell. There were 5 of us.
Oh gosh.
But a lot of the other guys were finalists for the parade. So I didn't say anything to anybody because I know if somebody asked me. But finally, Forrest Gregg had found out, and he came down running and hugged me. I said, here comes the coach that cut me. He was
What are you hugging me for? You cut me and sent me to Minnesota.
and
What are
he
you
told
doing?
me he had heard. So anyway, that's how I found out.
Yeah, and you're on the 75th anniversary team as well, and also in the 100th anniversary team in the NFL. So you have to be very, very proud of what you accomplished.
Yeah.
You're in the Montana State Hall of Fame, obviously. One of their greatest
Well, I
athletes.
tell you what,
So
they got one Hall of Fame that's very remarkable, the Big Sky Conference Hall of
Yes.
Fame, because they're people from all sports. Mm-hmm. And it isn't, well, I was picked for that, the only one from Montana State. But when I think about the track and field guys that we had, the basketball and football players, and I think, well, I was a good skier. I could kick football pretty far, but anyway, they picked me. So, but I think there were some people that could do sport better than I could up there.
Okay, so you get cut from Minnesota. Now you have to go, and during those days, a lot of times, especially early on in your career, you had jobs. A lot of the players had jobs to supplement their incomes because you weren't making that much money. You get cut from Minnesota. What were your thoughts about, what am I going to do now?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
where am I going to live?
Absolutely. So now, early on, when I was with the Chiefs, the early years in 1968, I started working at Country Club Bank. I did only one location, 414 Nichols Road. And I also, believe it or not, Frank, KBA Radio wanted me to read the sports news for the morning and night. And that hired me in 68.
Right.
So I did that for 7, 8 years. Just read the sports news. Frankly, it was some sports store I didn't like. I didn't use it. It wasn't quite like...
That's called editing.
It wasn't like controversial like it is now. If it wasn't something good about the Chiefs, I threw that in the wastebasket.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really good that way. And Lenny did, of course, that for years and years. I would
You
listen.
did KNBC TV,
So then I ended up making this kicking tee late in my career.
That's right. I forgot about the
instruction
kicking
book.
tee.
Then I was able to get it into Walmart. And that we sold over 100,000 of those for many years. So then I'm retired, and I got divorced and remarried, and my kids were in Montana. They were in high school.
Right.
So we moved to Montana because I wanted to see them as much as I could.
Absolutely,
before school.
yeah, sure.
And while I was up there, didn't make a dime. I lived there for 2 years, 3 years. I was starting to wonder, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And out of the absolute blue, I get a call from a headhunter in Oklahoma City, I think, that he's been hired by HNTB Corporation. He used to be called Howard Needles, Hammond, Bergedorf.
Right, that's the architecture firm.
Yeah, actually, but no, it's an engineering firm.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mainly civil engineer, the design of bridges and highways.
Right.
But they had merged with Kibit Myers, who was maybe the top architecture firm in town. They were the architect for Truman Sports Complex,
Right.
and also the new airport that opened in '73.
Right.
They had merged. So now some of the guys that had been on the baseball stadium and the football stadium, they felt like after that they weren't quite as important so they joined HOK, and really concentrated more on getting sports renovation of stadiums, new stadiums.
Right.
So HNTB was falling behind in that thing. So they hired me. The only reason I thought maybe I could be a door on my business card is a Director of Business Development, HNTB.
You get some open doors if you're on Stenerud.
Yeah, so they called. So I came back and did that, and I was able to get hold of athletic directors. Like I remember Ohio State and Michigan. The list goes on and on. That did renovations, and I remember we worked really hard. John Beek at that time was the GM for the Broncos, and of course our main competition had done the Coors Stadium already. But we were able to get we called it Vesco Field. That was the first name of it.
Yeah, right.
And also later, we got the San Francisco 49ers Stadium, and also HNTB, the design of the Allegiant Stadium, where Super Bowl was.
Right.
But most of our work was the renovations of colleges. Ohio State, I mentioned that, for many, many big stadiums, probably 7 or 8 stadiums in the Big Ten, for example. And now the firm that I work for is doing the renovation over at, I haven't worked with them for years now, over at KU.
At KU, yeah. I was just over there the other day, and I saw it all knocked down except for the one side they're keeping up until graduation. Yeah. Then they're going to knock it all down, implode the whole thing.
So for 22 years, I did that, traveled and did that, and all I need to know, I knew what we had done. I knew what the competition had done and knew our strength. But it was a little uphill battle for a while. We ended up getting a lot of work eventually. And the guy that hired me was Terry Miller, and he was a brilliant young man. By the way, he left HNTP years ago, and he's been hired shortly after that by the Las Vegas, what do you call it, Convention and
Visitors and Convention Bureau.
And he was a top guy, the Formula One out there.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It's a big deal.
Oh, that is a big deal.
Big deal.
Yeah.
And when he left, the guy that I worked with at Kansas City took over his job was a guy called Mike Handelman, and he married Bill Grigsby's daughter.
Yes, that's right, Bill Grigsby. Gosh, God, you're bringing up, oh boy, you're bringing up Mike, the great names now. Yeah. So then,
and Mike, they've been wonderful friends, and he's still there now. And it was a great firm. It's a great firm.
And Kansas City is now world-renowned for all their architectural firms. We're probably the leader in sports architecture in the entire world.
Yeah, they may have split and started other firms or whatever, but yeah, this is the main place to go if you want to find an architect for yours.
So are you still working?
No, I haven't done anything for 6-7 years.
Okay, for 6-7 years. And you decided after 6-7 years, I know you spend a lot of your summers in Montana, which is a good idea for you to go back up there. I know you have tremendous ties and friends, and I know you stay close to your friends. You could have gone anywhere, but you ended up staying in Kansas City as your permanent residence.
Yeah. Well, I lived of course, I came here. I didn't know much about Kansas City.
Right.
And then also I lived in Colorado for a little while, but I always ended up coming back here for a lot of reasons. I think my personality, it agrees with the most of the people I meet around here. Mm-hmm. I can't see myself in L.A. or in New York or the big glitzy lights.
I know exactly what you're talking about, yeah.
Nor do I want to live necessarily in a small town in North Dakota. It's close to Montana. Maybe.
Yeah, right.
No, but I mean, I like it, and it fits my personality, I think. I got a lot of friends. We had, and of course, the way the sports teams are in this team, it makes us a big league. But there's so many pretty places around the neighborhoods in Kansas City. You can drive around. I know a lot of it was around the Plaza area first, but you can drive around way out south, east, and west. Beautiful homes, nice places. Whether you drive on rush hour or during the day, it's about 5-minute difference in time it takes to get there. And I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
Make me comfortable.
And I think the people make you comfortable, and I think that's one of the biggest things. You know, we call this There's Just Something About Kansas City. Obviously, for everybody, it's a little bit different, but when you really cut through everything, it comes down to the people and the type of people we are here, hardworking, giving.
Yeah. No, I'm very happy here.
Yeah. So I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about your golf game. Okay, you were, and I know you're very humble about this most, but you were an excellent golfer. When did you pick up the sport of golf? Well, because I know in Norway, and I know Victor Hovland must be one of your heroes now on the tour, right?
I've been trying to reach him.
Yeah.
And I talked to his coach. The coach actually had to call me early on, Alan Broughton. He had actually gone to Norway to recruit a guy called Christopher Ventura. And while I was there, somebody said, yeah, this young kid, you look at Victor over here. He's pretty good, too.
Yeah.
He brought both back with him.
Wow, yeah.
And then I didn't hear about him, didn't know about him at all. But then he won the U.S. Amateur at Pebble.
Right.
And it was a friend of mine at Melbourne knew how to get hold of the coach at Oklahoma State. So I texted with him a few times.
Yeah.
I had a chance to meet him at the Waste Management at the Super Bowl the year before this year, last year.
That tournament is a zoo.
He was a few feet away from me. It was in competition, so I did not even walking from one tee box or green to the next tee box. I could have, but I didn't. It was right in the middle of
You
things.
understand.
So
understand what he's going through.
I did not want to throw him off at all.
Absolutely.
You know, so but Suzanne Pedersen, you may remember that name.
Mm-hmm.
She was one of the top lady golfers in the.
But there aren't many.
No.
There aren't many,
But
yeah.
I never heard of golf. I heard of there was maybe when I grew up. I heard of 2 golf courses. I know in the 70s and 80s they built 200 more. I know that. And so I get to Montana State, and the ski coach is actually a golf coach too. But I didn't even take a lesson from him because golf wasn't anything that wasn't a sport to us, kind of.
When did
We
you
underestimated the
When did you
sport.
pick up your first club?
So I played 9 holes in Bozeman, couldn't hit it at all.
Okay.
So I bought my first house on the 10th tee, 10th green, no, 10th fairway at Melbourne.
Okay.
It's between the clubhouse, 69th Street,
Right.
67th Street. So between 69, there's 5, 6 fairly nice houses. So I bought one right in the middle there. So if they hit the ball close to my house driveway, the street, and the fence to the golf course. If they got close to that fence to me, they hit it pretty far to the right. But I see people in golf carts. Some of them don't look in too good of a shape, maybe.
Right. They should be walking.
Get over to the ball, yeah. And they hit the ball, they dribble it on the ground about 20 yards, get back in the car, take a drink, swear a little bit, do it again. And I thought, what the hell is this? So I wasn't too interested. When I worked at Country Club Bank, there were 3 owners, a guy called Lee Huddleston, Jay Reynolds, and Bill Miller. Jay Reynolds is a member of Melbourne. And he says, you got to take up golf. But anyway, those days, the full membership was $3,000. This is in 1968.
Yeah.
Intermediate membership, we called it then, was $500. And I said, well, I'm 27, 8 years old. I got 7, 8 years before I ante up to 3,000.
Before they up the ante here, yeah.
So I went over and played some. Never went to the driving range. Never did.
Never took a lesson.
No, and it was I didn't respect the game enough. I didn't know. I was too dumb to understand the game and how great a game it is. So then after a while, I'd start getting a little better. All of a sudden, I get invited. They fly me to go to tournaments because your name is somewhat known in sports.
Right, absolutely.
And I remember one tournament being invited to the Foster Brooks golf tournament. Foster Brooks
This is a comedian.
the Drunk on the Dean Martin show, right?
Guy on
In Lexington, it's in Louisville, maybe. It is in Kentucky. I get paired with Tom Watson. Tom had won, I think he had won the Western Open. And we play, and of course, he's one of my heroes at that time.
Yeah.
And we played together. We sit and talk afterwards. And a couple of months later, he wins his first British Open, I remember. But so about that time, I start going to the driving range. And I said, why didn't I take class? Because my swing isn't like you see on TV. But I start to shoot pretty well, but I didn't. So now when I see a young kid on the driving range, and there was an old pro, Herman Charlo at Oakwood, he used to say,
Mm-hmm.
there's a 20 handicapped father with his wife and kids, and he's teaching them how to play. And he used to say, there's an amateur teaching an amateur to become an amateur. Right?
Right, that's exactly
So when I
right.
tell this guy, I said, I tell you what, you may not, you do yourself a favor, go up to the pro shop, get one of those pros, take the correct grip, the setup, the whole thing, and get started right. You'll enjoy it a lot more.
Grip, stance, and alignment.
Everything that you have more.
Absolutely.
And I did look at what this old guy doing, talking about. But anyway, it has I met so many great people traveling around the country, playing even, we talked earlier about the American Century Tournament.
Yes.
I played Pebble Beach and Spyglass in Spanish by now 27 years in a row. You know? And if I didn't play golf, I wouldn't experience
You've never
that.
been experienced those
No,
things. I
and
know.
going over to Norway even now and play golf, I have. Been to Ireland some, and many places around, alumni weekend here, or in Green Bay in Minnesota, or you name it. A lot of golf tournaments. So I'm so thankful that I took up that game. I have no idea what I would do. I know what in the world I do with my free time.
You and me both at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the pro thing is very important
and
for
it's such
people.
a unique game. You
It
can
is.
compete. I'm not Charles Barkley. We bet $2 or so. Okay,
Yeah.
But to go and compete some and then be around nice people in nice places, and friendship and enjoy it. You're a good player or
Right.
medium. It's a great game all the way around.
And you got very, very good. You ended up being Milburn's champion.
Well,
You were
did win it.
your club
one
champion,
year.
which is very, very difficult to do. People don't understand.
Yeah, and I shot. I think I averaged a couple over par every round. I didn't shoot in the 60s, but I shoot in the mid to low 70s some in those days.
Right.
But so I call myself was a fairly good golfer. But the real good golfer is like I remember playing with Jim Colbert.
Oh gosh, yes.
But he had just some of these things come back to me. He had just beaten Fuzzy Zeller down on either Byron Nelson or the Colonial in the mid '80s, and I had known him some over the years. And he comes, we play Melbourne, and Lynn Dickey plays for this too, and he shoots like 67. Now we go to Boots and Coats, Lynn.
Oh yeah,
Jim,
the chicken place.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in come Charlie Lewis. He's the head pro at
Mission.
Yeah. And Jim says, "Hey, you think Stenerud and I can we play the place tomorrow morning?" And Charlie Lewis says, "Well, we have first tee time is about 7:30, I think it was. We come at about 7:15." So I called my two brother-in-laws at the time, Dick and Jamie Clancy. We go over there and we maybe putt for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Charlie said, "Why don't you go on the back tee, number 10?" So we decide to hit. Jim hits it 1 iron right down. So we all said, "Hey, let's hit one more." So he go down. His balls are about 2 feet apart. He goes up to shoot 60.
Oh my gosh.
And he got excited too because it was one of the best rounds they ever played. And my brother-in-laws at the time said, "The pros this good all the time." I said, "No, you're seeing something you're not going to see."
You
very
will
well."
not see this. Yeah.
And he shot 60. I remember.
Wow.
And of course, later Jim on the senior tour. Remember, he shot, was it 61 or 28 on the back nine?
Right.
Or 28. He birdied 8 in a row. Par
eight
number
balls in a row.
18. He shot 28 on the back nine in the second round.
It's incredible.
And
Yeah.
he won 26, 27 times on the.
You would have never experienced any of that without playing golf.
No, I wouldn't.
Isn't that
experience-
amazing?
No.
That was absolutely amazing. Talk a little bit before we finish. Talk a little bit about the family. Tell me about the kids and Patty, and just give me a rundown of the family, and we can go from there.
No, we're fine. My wife Patty is wonderful. My daughter works for Cerner,
Okay.
and I met Cliff many, many years ago, and I said, "Well, I can't guarantee her a job, but I can guarantee her an interview." She got hired. She's doing fine. My son lives in Bozeman. I'm struggling with him a little bit.
Okay.
He has been in and out of work, so I have some. Well, not only me, him and I, we need to find a way to get along better, and that's what
Yes.
we're working on.
Yes. I think that's wonderful because I had a son the same way, and I lost him eventually. But not through the problems we were having, but the idea that when he was younger, we had some tremendous issues, he and I especially. But I think the one thing in my life that I did that was good that I'll give you is we reconciled before he died. And if we hadn't, I'm not sure how it'd be, but we reconciled before that. So the only thing I would say somehow is, and I know you're reaching out to him, and it takes two. Okay, it took him to come back to me because I had reached out. It never reached back, and then eventually he started to reach back, and we reconciled our differences. And the only thing I would say is keep reaching out to your son, and I think it'll eventually work out.
So that's my most important thing right now.
Absolutely.
And he agreed to go to counseling. I've agreed to go to counseling.
That's wonderful.
So that's the most important to me right now.
Yeah, it is. And it's hard being my son always told me it's hard being your son, Dad. He said, you're on television every night, you're this, you're that, whatever, which I never really thought of myself as and never really brought it up to my kids much. But, he's living in, your shadow basically for all practical purposes.
Well, of course, I never think of it that way.
Yeah, I know you don't. I know.
But anyway, that's
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I knew some about your problem there, sad times that you went through, Frank, and it's no, that's my number one goal right now.
Yeah.
Is to get along a lot better with him.
You bet. And I think that's why you surround yourself with the people you surround yourself. You surround yourself with friends and people you can talk to, and just go through all those things with. And I know it's not easy. And I didn't mean to end on that note, but I think for everybody out there, I think it's a lesson learned for all of us.
Well, I think probably everybody, not everybody, a lot of people have their. If you knew everything, Art still has some comments sometimes.
Yeah.
He made some comments, but you never know. Don't say anything unkind to someone. You never know what that other person is going through in his personal life.
Right.
So there are a lot of people that have challenges.
Yeah, and I think people like you, okay, and people who are fair, people believe, oh, well, nothing ever happens to them. Their lives are perfect, and that's just not true. That's just not true. So that's just where it is. I appreciate you coming in.
I talked a lot, but I guess you talk on this show.
We talk on this show, my friend. Thanks,
Frank. I enjoyed it very much.
Hey, listen, God bless you.
And I enjoy where we live.
You bet. God bless you. Yep. Folks, as we've always said, just something about Kansas City.